The train wheezed to a stop at Cedar Ridge Station, steam hissing into the cold Montana morning. Elena pressed her palm against the frost-covered window, watching the small cluster of wooden buildings emerge from November mist. Her fingers left prints on the condensation, the only mark she'd made on anything in months. She stepped onto the platform, carrying a worn leather satchel and the smell of smoke that had followed her from Chicago. The other passengers hurried past, but Elena stood still, breathing in pine and something else, something burnt that made her stomach clench. "You the teacher?" An old man approached, his weathered face creased with lines that spoke of winters spent squinting into blizzards. His pale eyes studied her with attention reserved for wounded animals. "Elena Cartwright," she said, extending her hand. "Thomas Whitehorse. The children been waiting." As they walked toward his truck, Thomas's gaze lingered on her coat sleeve, where ash had settled despite her efforts to brush it clean. "The fire that took the last teacher still burns in some places. Ground won't let it die." Elena's breath caught. "Fire?" 3 months back. Started in the schoolhouse furnace, spread to the Hendersons' place. Miss Eleanor made sure all the children got out before the smoke took her. Through the windshield, Elena saw the town spread before them. A general store, a church, and beyond it all, the skeleton of a burned building, its charred beams reaching toward gray clouds. "That's where you'll be teaching," Thomas said, nodding toward a small white building beside the ruins. "New schoolhouse." Elena stared at the burnt remains, catching that bitter, hungry scent that had followed her across 3 states. Her hands began to shake. "Elder McBride said Miss Eleanor was chosen," Thomas continued. "Said the fire spoke to her before it took her." "That's not possible." "Maybe not where you come from. But out here, fire remembers things." At the boarding house, Mrs. Kowalski showed Elena to a small room with a window facing east, away from the ruins. "Don't talk about the fire," the woman said sharply. "This town's trying to heal. Sometimes healing means forgetting." But as Elena unpacked, 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a photograph of her sister she couldn't bear to look at, she knew forgetting wasn't something she understood. The Chicago fire had taught her that some things burn forever. That night, she smelled smoke in the wind. Not hearth fires, but something hungrier. She pressed her face into the pillow and tried not to think about Rose's hand in hers before the smoke took everything away. The new schoolhouse smelled of fresh pine and chalk dust, trying too hard to forget what had stood there before. Elena arrived early, arranging her few materials on the desk. McGuffey's reader, a slate, and a small bell that had belonged to Rose. The children arrived in clusters, avoiding glances toward the burnt ruins. The youngest, Lucy, clutched a cornhusk doll and kept looking toward corners where shadows gathered despite morning light. "Are you going to die like Miss Eleanor?" The question came from Jimmy, a serious boy in the back row. Elena felt their stares, how they held their breath, waiting. "I don't know," she said honestly. The answer surprised them. Lucy loosened her grip on the doll slightly. "Miss Eleanor said she wasn't going to die either," said Mary Catherine, freckles scattered across her nose. "But the fire wanted her anyway." "The fire doesn't want anything," Elena said gently. "Fire isn't alive." "Elder McBride says it is," Jimmy replied. "Says it talks to people. Says it told Miss Eleanor secrets." During recess, Elena watched the children avoid the area closest to the ruins. Lucy stood apart, her doll pressed against her ear. She does that since the fire, Jimmy said. Says her doll talks to her. Says it tells her things about Miss Eleanor. What kind of things? That Miss Eleanor's still writing. Writing in the fire now, making words out of smoke and ash. That afternoon, teaching geography, Elena found herself drawing Montana with unusual detail, marking not just rivers and mountains, but places where fires had burned. Her hand moved without conscious thought, sketching patterns that looked like flames spread across dry grass. Miss Cartwright? Mary Catherine's voice startled her. Are you all right? Elena looked at the blackboard, at the intricate web of lines she'd drawn without realizing. The children stared with expressions they'd given Miss Eleanor. The look of children who sense what adults prefer to ignore. Don't erase it, Lucy whispered. It's not finished yet. Elena's hand froze. On the blackboard, the lines seemed to pulse, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw words forming in chalk dust. Not English, but something older. Class dismissed, she said hoarsely. As the children left, Elena remained at the blackboard, staring at patterns she couldn't remember making. That evening, she found herself walking toward the burnt schoolhouse, drawn by something she couldn't name. She too smelled of smoke that wouldn't wash clean. She too carried secrets that whispered in the dark. Elena found Elder McBride on the church steps, hands wrapped around steaming coffee. She hadn't planned to seek him out, but her feet had carried her there after another night of dreams, filled with smoke and Rose's voice. Heard you had an interesting first day, he said without looking up. They're good children. They've been through something terrible. We all have. But some carry fire differently than others. His eyes studied her face. You smell like smoke, Miss Cartwright. Not the good kind. The kind that follows people who've lost something to flames. Elena's breath caught. I don't know what you mean. Chicago fire was 10 years back, but some folks still carry it. Tell me, what did you lose in Chicago? The question hung between them like smoke itself. Elena felt her throat close, the way it always did when anyone came too close to Rose's memory. My sister, she whispered. Rose, she was only 15. And you blame yourself. I was supposed to watch her, but I fell asleep, and when I woke up, the fire was everywhere. I couldn't find her in the smoke. But you lived? I lived? The words tasted like ash. Sometimes I think the fire made a mistake. Sometimes I think it's still looking for me. Maybe it is. Fire's got a long memory. Miss Eleanor said the same thing. Right up until the end, she insisted fire was just fire. But the children knew better. He stood slowly. Little Lucy's been having dreams about you. Says you're writing in the fire, same as Miss Eleanor. I don't write in fire. Check your bag when you get back. Elena's heart pounded as she climbed to her room. Her satchel sat on the bed, seemingly undisturbed. But when she opened it, her breath caught. Beneath her possessions lay a notebook bound in scorched leather. With trembling fingers, she opened it to find pages covered in her own handwriting, though she had no memory of writing the words. Day 1. The children recognize me. They see the fire that follows. Elena tries to forget, but fire remembers everything. Day 2. Lucy's doll speaks truths Elena fears. The patterns on the blackboard were a map, a trail, a promise. Elena dropped the notebook, watching pages flutter closed. But not before she saw more entries, documenting days that hadn't happened yet. Conversations she'd never had. A knock startled her. Miss Cartwright? Are you all right? Elena shoved the notebook back into her bag. But when she opened the door to Mrs. Kowalski's worried face, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Ash in her hair, soot around her eyes, fingertips blackened as if she'd been writing with charcoal. That night, she opened the notebook again, compelled by forces beyond understanding. She watched her hand lift charcoal and begin to write. Elena reads the fire's journal. Elena learns that some stories begin in flames. The fire that took Rose was only the first chapter. Elena is the third. Fire is patient. Fire knows Elena needs time to understand her purpose, to accept her place in the story that began in Chicago and will end when the last word is written in smoke and ash. Elena closed the notebook and pressed smoke-stained hands against her face. In the distance, she heard children's laughter bright against November's sky. She thought of Lucy's doll, Jimmy's worried eyes, Mary Catherine's whispered questions. The fire had been looking for her all along. For 3 days, Elena tried to ignore the notebook that wrote itself, tried to pretend the ash on her fingers came from chalk. But the fire was growing impatient. "Miss Cartwright?" Lucy stood beside her desk after the other children had gone home. "My dolly says you're scared." Elena knelt beside the girl's chair. "Lucy, where did you get your doll?" "Miss Eleanor gave her to me, the day before the fire. She said the doll would help me understand when the fire came back." Lucy held up the doll, and Elena noticed for the first time that its cornhusk face had been charred. "She said you'd know what to do when you got here." "I don't know what to do." Lucy studied her with gravity beyond her years. "But you write in the fire, don't you? The doll sees you writing at night when you think you're sleeping. She sees your sister watching from the flames." "Stop. Please stop. Rose wants you to finish the story. She's been waiting so long." Before Elena could respond, the schoolhouse door burst open. Thomas stood in the doorway, his face grim. "Miss Cartwright, you need to come. The Hendersons' barn is burning. The children are safe, but Mary Catherine's asking for you. She says the fire won't stop until you come." The drive took minutes, but Elena felt like she was traveling through time itself. The smoke was visible long before they reached the farm. A black column rising straight up, defying wind that should have bent it eastward. When they arrived, Elena saw what Thomas meant. The flames seemed contained, almost directed. They moved across the structure in deliberate patterns, creating shapes that looked like letters. "It's writing," Elena breathed. Mary Catherine broke free from her parents and ran to Elena. "The fire's writing, just like you do. It's writing names in the smoke. Rose, Eleanor. Your name, Miss Cartwright." Elena walked closer to the flames. The heat should have been unbearable, but instead, she felt strange coolness, as if the fire were welcoming her home. She reached into her pocket and found the charcoal that always appeared in her hand. "Elena, no!" Thomas's voice came from behind, but it sounded distant. Elena began to write in the air, her charcoal leaving black marks against orange glow. "I'm here, I remember. I'm sorry it took so long." The flames pulsed with approval, and new words appeared in smoke. Not in English, but in a language of heat and light that Elena understood perfectly. "The story isn't finished. Rose waits. Choose. What choice? Feed the fire or let it consume everything. Write the ending or watch it burn forever." Elena looked back at the crowd, Thomas with worried eyes, Mary Catherine with tears, Townspeople frozen between fear and fascination. If I feed the fire, will it stop? If Elena writes the true ending, the fire will rest. But Elena must give what the fire requires. What does the fire require? The answer came in memory. Rose's face in flames, Rose's voice calling her name, Rose's hand reaching through smoke in those last terrible moments in Chicago. The fire requires Elena to join the story, to write the ending from inside the flames. Elena's charcoal crumbled. Behind her, she heard Thomas shouting, Mary Catherine crying, the crowd realizing what she was about to do. But Elena had carried Rose's death for 10 years, running from town to town with smoke and ash and unbearable knowledge that she had failed. If the fire would finally put Rose to rest, if it would spare these children. Elena stepped closer to the flames, ready to write the ending that had been waiting since Chicago burned. Elena, stop! Thomas's voice cut through flame roar. But Elena moved as if through water, each step toward the burning barn, deliberate and inevitable. As she reached the entrance, flames parted like curtains, revealing unburned ground leading into the fire's heart. The crowd fell silent, and in that silence, Elena heard Rose's laughter. Bright, young, impossibly alive. Elena, you came. Rose's voice was older now, sadder, but unmistakably hers. Elena stepped into the fire, expecting pain. Instead, she found herself in a place between burning and not burning, between memory and reality. The barn's interior stretched impossibly far, walls lined with books that glowed like embers. The fire keeps all the stories, Rose said, standing among burning books, unchanged from the 15-year-old who died in Chicago. Every story that ends in flames gets written here. Miss Eleanor. Elena saw the teacher beside Rose, holding a pen that wrote in light. She came here too. She came to finish her story, just like you've come to finish ours. Elena looked around the impossible library, at shelves stretching into smoke-filled darkness. What is this place? The heart of fire, where all burning stories live. But some stories are too heavy for fire to carry alone. Some need to be told by the people who lived them. Eleanor stepped forward, her face peaceful in firelight. The fire doesn't destroy stories, Elena. It preserves them, but it needs people to tell them. Elena pulled out the notebook, its leather binding warm. When she opened it, pages glowed with self-writing words. What does the fire want me to write? The truth, Rose said. The story of why I died and why you lived. What happened in Chicago that you've never told anyone? Elena's hands shook as she lifted Eleanor's offered pen. Words flowed like blood from a wound. Rose was running toward the fire when Elena found her. Not away, toward it. Rose had heard crying from the tenement next door, a baby trapped on the 3rd floor. Elena tried to stop her, grabbed Rose's arm, but Rose was stronger than Elena had given her credit for. There's a baby, Rose said, determined. I can hear it crying. I can get there through the window. Elena should have gone instead. Elena was older, stronger, but Elena was afraid. Elena had always been afraid, and Rose had always been brave. Elena watched her sister disappear into smoke. For 10 minutes, 10 endless minutes, she heard nothing. Then Rose appeared at the window, coughing, dress singed, cradling something precious against her chest. Take the baby, Rose gasped. passing the infant through the window. "The stairs are gone. I have to find another way down." Those were Rose's last words. The building collapsed before she could escape, and Elena was left holding a baby that wasn't hers while her sister burned. Elena's pen stopped. The words glowed brighter, as if the fire were reading, learning, understanding. "You saved a baby," Rose said, voice soft with wonder. "You saved a life, Elena. My death meant something. I chose it." Elena looked at her sister, the girl who died saving someone else's child. "But I should have stopped you. And if you had died, who would have taught all those children? Who would have been there for Lucy and Jimmy and Mary Catherine?" Rose smiled bright as flame. "The fire doesn't just take. It gives stories. It gives meaning. It gives the chance for some deaths to matter." Elena understood now why the fire had followed her. It collected stories, but needed people to tell them. "What happens now?" "Now you choose," Eleanor said. "Stay here and help tell stories that need telling. Or go back and teach the children what you've learned. That fire isn't just destruction. That some stories are too important to let die." Elena thought of Mary Catherine's tears, Lucy's prophetic doll, Jimmy's worried questions. "If I go back, will the fire follow me?" "The fire will always follow you," Rose said. "But now you know how to feed it. Not with death, but with stories. Not with fear, but with understanding." Elena closed the notebook, feeling its weight differently now. Not a burden, but a gift. She looked at Rose one last time. "I love you. I love you too. Now go. The children are waiting." Elena walked back through fire, through the place where stories lived and burned and were reborn. As she emerged, flames closed behind her in benediction. The fire began to die, its work finished, its hunger satisfied. Thomas reached her first, checking for burns that weren't there. Elena stood unmarked, except for ash that had always clung to her. But now it felt purposeful, like words waiting to be written. "The fire got what it came for," she said simply. "It got its story." Winter came early, but the schoolhouse stayed warm. Elena arrived each morning to find the fire already burning, though no one admitted to lighting it. The flames danced with unusual patterns, and sometimes she saw words forming in the coals. Messages of encouragement, glimpses of stories yet to be told. The children changed after the barn fire. They no longer flinched when Elena wrote on the blackboard, no longer whispered fears about her disappearing. Instead, they leaned forward when she spoke, hungry for stories she had learned to tell. "Fire isn't evil," Elena explained one December morning, watching snowflakes melt against windows. "Fire is energy, looking for something to transform. Sometimes it transforms wood into warmth, sometimes buildings into ash, and sometimes people into stories." Lucy raised her hand, her doll sitting quietly. It hadn't whispered since the barn fire. What kind of story did Miss Eleanor become? Miss Eleanor became the story of a teacher who loved her students so much that she made sure they were safe. Her story lives in the fire, teaching other people how to be brave. "What about your sister?" Jimmy asked. Rose became the story of someone who chose to run toward danger because she heard a baby crying and knew she could help. Her story teaches us that sometimes the most important thing is the thing that scares you most. At lunchtime, Elena walked to where the Henderson barn had stood. The ground remained black, but new grass pushed through ash, and winter wheat grew with unusual vigor in fire-touched soil. "Plants grow better in burnt ground," Thomas told her one afternoon. "Fire releases nutrients, makes things grow stronger." Elena nodded, understanding. "People too, sometimes. You staying? For good?" Elena looked toward the schoolhouse, where children's faces pressed against windows. "I've been running for 10 years. I think it's time I stopped." That evening, Elena sat writing letters by lamplight. Ordinary ink on ordinary paper, explaining to school boards in other towns that she wouldn't be returning, that she'd found her place at last. As she wrote, she felt warmth at her shoulder, as if someone read over her arm. Rose's presence no longer frightened her. It had become comfort, reminder that love persisted beyond flame, beyond the 10 years Elena had spent carrying guilt. A soft knock interrupted her. Lucy stood in the hallway with her doll. "Mama made you bread," the girl said, holding up a warm bundle. "To thank you for staying." Elena accepted the loaf, inhaling yeast and grain and comfort of food made with care. "Thank you, Lucy." Lucy lingered thoughtfully. "My dolly used to tell me things, about the fire, about what was going to happen. But now she's quiet." "Are you worried?" "No. I think she's quiet because the scary part is over. The fire got what it needed, and now we can just be normal again." Elena smiled, thinking how normal had taken on new meaning since her walk through flames. Sometimes the most magical thing about magic is when it knows to end. After Lucy left, Elena returned to her letters, distracted by her window view. Snow was falling in earnest, covering the town in white that made everything look clean and new. Smoke rose from chimneys, ordinary smoke, carrying ordinary prayers of families gathered around ordinary fires. But Elena had learned there was nothing ordinary about survival, about choosing to stay when running seemed easier, about the courage it took to transform pain into wisdom, loss into story, fear into understanding. She opened her notebook to a fresh page and began to write. Not with supernatural compulsion, but with simple human desire to preserve something beautiful. She wrote about Lucy's doll falling silent, about Jimmy's wisdom, about Mary Catherine's tears that helped Elena remember her own capacity for healing. She wrote about a town that had seen fire and chosen to rebuild, about children who looked at their ash-covered teacher and decided to trust anyway, about understanding that some truths could only be learned in flames. Most of all, she wrote about Rose. Not Rose the victim, but Rose the hero, Rose the chooser, Rose the girl who heard a baby crying and decided someone else's life was worth the risk. As snow continued falling, church bells marked another day's end in Cedar Ridge. Tomorrow, there would be arithmetic and spelling and stories to tell. Tomorrow, there would be children who needed to understand that fire could teach as well as destroy, that some endings were beginnings, that love persisted even when its form changed. Elena closed her notebook and prepared for bed, aware that for the first time in 10 years, she felt no urge to pack, no restless need to move on. The fire had found her, taught her its lessons, shown her the difference between running from her story and learning to tell it. Outside, snow fell softly on a town that had seen fire and chosen love, on a schoolhouse where tomorrow's lessons waited, on ash-rich ground where new things grew stronger and more beautiful than what had come before. Elena slept without dreams of smoke for the first time since Chicago burned. And in the morning, she woke to children's laughter and the warm crackle of a fire that had finally found its proper home.